Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank.
Hey, welcome back to the Analog Gamers. We're glad you're listening. Today we're going to talk about something that maybe technically isn't a mechanic, but we all believe is a super important part of gaming and is specifically to some games used, and that's negotiation. So negotiation is just as you think it is. It's any time you're negotiating with another player within the game. And sometimes this is, please don't kill me. I'm not a threat. And other times it's actually a legitimate way to engage the game and engage with other players. So what are some games that you guys know that you've used a lot of negotiation in before?
Go ahead.
I think every time we play Catan, there's a whole lot of negotiation going on around the trading.
Yeah, what kind of negotiation? So just in trading resources?
I know you have that darn resource that I need.
Yes.
How do I get it from you?
Yes. Rarely do you say, I know you have that sheep, because normally sheep is kind of the bastard child of resources in Catan.
Yes.
There have been days, but usually it's bricks.
Yeah, usually bricks.
Yeah.
That's true.
That would be the game I think of as negotiation. And often negotiation is exactly that, trading. In addition to trading with players, sometimes there's trading within the game. So it's like you're representing trading going on between countries. And the one I think of is Clash of Cultures, where trading is actually a technology on the tech tree that you pick, and that's not trading between players. That is, your country has now established international trade kind of a thing.
Right.
They figured out how not to be China during the isolationist period.
Yes.
But I think that's a little different because in that, yes, there is the trading in your technology tree, but you're not actually trading anything. You just got to get your guys close to the other cities, and then you start collecting food or money.
And it's not really negotiation in any one sense. In Catan, I can say, no, I don't want a brick for my
wheat.
For my wheat. I want 2 bricks for my wheat because I know you really have no way of getting wheat, and I can push it a little bit.
Yeah.
So there is definitely, it's not just a one-to-one trade. You can negotiate the terms of the trade too.
And I think we've all come across the jerk who's like, I want 5 bricks for your wheat. And you're like, I can trade it for cheaper to the bank.
I can afford a one.
No, the best one was Daniel, who one time, quite a few years ago, said, who's got wood to trade? And George and I were playing, and we said, we have it. And he laid down a Monopoly card and just stole it all.
Oh.
Like, you're a rat.
That's rough. Yeah, so in Catan,
there's negotiation going on there,
There
too.
is negotiation going on there, and that was a smart play on his part.
So I think we would all agree that to some extent, there's negotiation in every single board game that you play.
Whether it's in the rules and intended or not.
Or not. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I said it's not necessarily a mechanic, but rather kind of a culture of board gaming is this negotiation aspect. There's almost some of that social contract that we've talked about, right? Like, if there's 4 of you at the table and one player is really losing, typically you negotiate and you don't go after that player right away.
Or conversely, if one player is really winning, the 3 of you
3
might
others.
say, okay,
Yeah.
we got to take him down.
Unless it's a game where you're trying to get people out, and then some people go after the weakest player just to get them out of the...
Yeah, that's
Yes, which I did to you the other day.
That's a little rough. But
Well, it was specifically a combat game.
yeah.
And the idea was, I have 2 people I'm fighting. Let's get rid of one now.
All right, so what are some games that you guys would say negotiation is a solid mechanic within the game?
When you say a solid mechanic, do you mean a staple of the game or is in the rules?
I would say in the rules.
So, my favorite's going to be Mistborn. I think it is the only game that I know that and I say we've played because I've been the only one who's actually played it.
So we haven't played, but you have.
Right.
I played
Gotcha.
half a game.
Frank tried to start a game and then left. So,
Not my choice. I was not abandoning the game by choice.
But anyways, the entire game is really about negotiation, and built into the rules is everything in the game. You can trade, you can negotiate, you can, however you need to get to solve the problems on the board, you can do that.
Yeah.
And the base of it is there are problems marching across the board. And on your turn, if you want to solve one of those problems, generally you can't do it by yourself, or if you can, you're going to leave yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to do much else for a while. So you're going to try to get other people to help you and split those points up. But you can also choose anything else you have on your board to give to someone else, show to someone else, work with someone else on. And it's unlike a lot of other games that you get negotiation in the game, but the rules specifically state you can't show anything, you can't do anything. This one is go for it. See what negotiations you can come up with. If it's that you're doing dishes tonight, that's fine.
That's-
Really?
It
Even
does.
metagame ones?
It
Does it
mentions
say
in
that
there.
in the rules?
It does.
Wow.
That's so interesting.
That-
So it is all about the negotiation.
okay, there might have to be some limits on that. I'm not trading anything that involves physical labor or actual, like large pricey items.
I know one thing that Frank likes to trade or bet on is steak dinners because he thinks he wins either way.
Yeah,
he
you
gets
can't
steak
lose.
either way.
You can't lose.
Whoever's buying.
And the thing in the game is there are certain cards that make trades binding, which I don't know how that works in the metagame, but I guess you'd have to deal with that on your
Binding
own
is
personal
as your
level.
relationship gets.
But otherwise, the trade is not necessarily. There are other cards that let you revoke that, remove the conditions on it, however you want to do that. So the negotiations are also tinged
really
by
interesting.
this. They could be broken.
Huh.
That's really interesting.
That is interesting.
Another game that I know that
Enforcement might be an issue if it's outside the
Enforcement,
game.
yeah.
How are you going to make me do this? Go ahead.
well, and I even think that's right, unless it's written in the rules that any agreement is binding. I think that's always a tenuous situation, right? So say we're playing an area control game, and I say, no, I'm not going to attack you. What's really preventing me from attacking you?
The
Unless
poster
it's-
child for this is diplomacy, right? The poster child for this is diplomacy where everybody breaks up, has secret negotiations outside the room, and then comes back together with what the written orders are, and then they're executed in a sequence, and there's no way to stop that sequence. So the fact that I agreed to support you, and really what I'm going to do is back off and support Brent in attacking you. You got once that starts happening, all you can sit there and do is feel the knife going into your back.
Yeah,
There's nothing else left.
it's a
Other than
familiar
you can-
feeling
you
in this game group.
Now, in contrast, Dune, once you make that alliance, and you can only make the alliance whenever the worm comes up, you're stuck.
Yeah,
You're going to be
You
in
don't
that
have
until
a
the next
choice.
worm comes up.
yeah. Aren't there other elements in negotiation in Dune where you can give? Can't you give weapons or something at some point? Am I making this up?
No, you're making this up.
Typical.
There is. So the weird part about Dune, from terms of negotiation, is you can negotiate your alliance, but the rules of the alliance are fairly rigid.
Yeah, once you're allied.
You can agree to. I mean, you can agree to move or something like that, but you don't need to have an alliance to say I'm going to pull out of this territory. You do to share some of that this game has variable player powers, and to share those variable player powers, you have to have a formal alliance.
I realized where I was thinking of negotiation in Dune. So in Dune, the currency is called spice,
Yes.
and you can pay other players for certain things. So the guild, you can pay them and negotiate with them to ship your people onto the planet because they can refuse.
Right.
I think the Emperor has some power that you can negotiate and pay them to use as well.
You could negotiate and pay anybody.
That's true. So
So-
that's the negotiation factor I was thinking of. You can pay. So the Atreides can look at future cards.
Right.
You could pay them money to have you tell them what the card
That's
is.
right.
That's the negotiation part I was thinking of.
And that does not require an alliance. That could
Correct.
just be, that's just outright negotiation.
Right. That's the part I was thinking
Which, if you think about it, I mean, that's one of those areas that's not talked about in the rules. There's no discussion about negotiation outside of an alliance.
of. I think there is
Yeah,
actually.
there is. Because it
Is
says you
there?
can exchange spice for information at any time.
I think they call it bribes. I think they say
Yes.
you can bribe.
Oh, that's true.
So they
Okay,
don't
yeah, I
use
guess you're
the
right.
word negotiation, but they use the word bribe. I think that is.
We
written
say
in
that
the
is in the rules. We just almost never do it.
Which, yeah, I mean, you talk about bribes. Shane, you really like Sheriff of Nottingham.
Yeah,
And that's really, I mean, bribery is a whole
that's a
portion.
huge part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
so,
it's the core of the game. Isn't
so in
it?
Sheriff of Nottingham, every player takes a turn playing the sheriff, and all the other players are trying to sneak goods into Nottingham. Some of them are the goods that you say they are, some are not, and there's also restricted goods or banned goods or whatever they're called. And so if I'm the sheriff and you're trying to get all these
Weapons.
weapons past me, you can actually negotiate with me and say, I'll give you 10 gold to not check my bag and not check my goods as I'm coming into Nottingham. So that's a huge part of that game. I think if you played Sheriff of Nottingham without negotiation and bribes, I think it would be a very boring game. Because bluffing is such a huge part of it, and sometimes you can't bluff, so you got to pay the sheriff off anyway.
Right.
There's also been some, extra negotiation in there, so it's not written in the rules, but things like, well, if you let this bag through, I won't check yours next time.
Right.
However, again, there's no mechanism to ensure that's binding.
So, that's the same kind of outside the rules negotiation that we'll use this as an example again, Monopoly gets, right?
Mhm.
If you don't charge me this time for landing on your property because I'm going to go bankrupt,
Yeah.
I won't charge you the next 3 times
Yeah.
or whatever.
Or even like, if you give me this property to give me a Monopoly, I'll give you never have to pay when
for
you
that
land on
property,
these ones.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I feel like those never work out well in Monopoly.
So not all of them are smart. I think actually if you play hardball, most instances you come out better. But that's a separate question on how to negotiate, not where is negotiation.
Well, I think most of my negotiations probably aren't smart, but that's okay. So another thing that we've talked about is co-op games. So games where all the players are playing together against the game, or one versus the rest games where one player is playing the game and then all of the other players around the table are playing against that player.
Like Fury of Dracula?
Such as Fury of Dracula.
Okay.
So I would argue that any co-op game or any game that has an element of co-op intrinsically is a negotiation game. What do you guys think of that concept?
I think that's probably true most of the time. I think it's a different kind of negotiation because it's no longer a negotiation of how do I get ahead, but it's a negotiation of how do we get ahead.
Yeah.
And that means we got to communicate more than negotiate potentially.
Have you ever played though where like two players just completely disagree on the course the team should take? And then as a team you gotta figure out what the heck you're gonna do anyway.
So no. Well, so in general, I would say there's a difference between planning as a group and negotiation. But I have had instances where two people are butting heads about what the group should do, but I've never seen them negotiate it out. All I've seen is finally somebody goes, "Fine, whatever," and that's it. The other person goes and they do what that person. I've never seen it negotiated
I love
successfully.
when there's two people doing that, and neither one of them are the people who are going to actually do the action.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true.
Yeah.
Two arguing about a third player's action. I do think of Fury of Dracula, and I think it's a type of negotiation, right? When you're just getting whipped by Dracula, and everybody's like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, if I go here, you go there, you go there. And then, well, I need this card that you have, so we got to meet up and give me that card. So I think there's some, planning, but kind of some negotiation of, it might hurt me as an individual player to give you this weapon, but overall it might be better for the team.
I guess I see negotiation as more give and take.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe there's some of that because you do this and I'll give you this. But most of the time it's still to our mutual benefit. It's not I actually have to suffer some to gain in one area to gain in another area, which is the way I think of negotiation. And I think that's where I'm drawing the difference. I'm not sure it matters.
So what about thinking, right, they're kind of co-op-y at
Co-op-y?
times.
Is that a word?
Co-op-y at times. Role-playing games. So thinking of playing D&D. Like, you're all in a party together, but you're not necessarily, my character's not playing for your character's benefit.
Oh, that's right.
And so there's negotiation of, like, okay, you got this incredible item, but you're a rogue and you can't use it. So how can we negotiate that I can get it from you? Because it may not be in your best interest to actually give it to me, even though I'm a part of your party.
Or I may be able to extort a whole lot of something else out of you, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've got a lot of gold. I want.
Yeah, so I think negotiation's a huge part of role-playing games.
I would agree.
What do you think, Brent?
I would agree with you, and I think it's more interesting when it is a rogue character or someone who is not necessarily a good character. Not that all rogues are bad, but we'll go with it here.
If you're a rogue, we're not necessarily calling you bad.
But someone who could, in the night, steal it back or go sell it somewhere.
Yeah.
Get away with all that kind of stuff without the character knowing. Like we said before, when a character can go behind someone's back and not follow through in an agreement, that always makes the negotiation more fun.
Yeah.
More gamey.
I think a part of, so when I talk about RPGs, I pretty much just think of D&D because that's where my experience is.
Right.
I think another negotiation in D&D is sometimes with the dungeon master. of like, I really believe my character can do this. Are you actually going to let me roll and try to do this? Right? So like, my wizard's robes are huge, and I think it's going to help him like jump off his balcony and kind of land softly on the ground. And so you're kind of negotiating with the DM of like Brent shaking his head when he's DM.
That's how that works.
I don't think
But so like
the robe
this,
or the negotiation.
The rope.
both probably. So I think there's also a level of negotiation between players and the DM when you're playing D&D that is kind of unique to that experience.
Yeah, I gotta disagree with that one too. But maybe I'm thinking of this too legalistically, having grown up in a household of lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're negotiating with somebody who ultimately holds all the cards, right? The DM can just say, no, you're wrong. And there's not a thing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
You have no recourse. That's not a negotiation job. That's a sales job.
But I think
I have to sell you on this idea.
The DM doesn't hold all the cards, though. Ultimately, the players need to have fun, or they won't come back. So,
well, and I think there's an investment of
that's
the
true.
DM too of like, I spent 3 hours prepping this and you want to completely destroy it with this action. So I think there is, within the game, there should be no investment from the DM. But I think in reality, I think there is some investment of like,
That's probably true.
I put time and effort and thought into preparing this, and you're just trying to completely trash it. So whether there should be or not, I think there is some negotiation because the DM has investment in the storyline they've created, the world they've created, and all the prep work.
But the difference between my thought and yours too, Brent, is you guys are taking it now outside the magic circle, right?
Yeah.
Because there's
Yes.
this idea that I'm going to ruin the game experience or that people won't come back. That's outside I was thinking inside the magic circle.
But even so, I think negotiation, 9 times out of 10 is outside that circle, right? In Monopoly, yeah, it's invested within the game, but it's not within the rules.
But that doesn't make it outside the fact it's inside or outside the magic circle is not necessarily tied to the rules, right? You're still within the world of the game.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brent.
the Catan trading is probably not within the world of the game when you do something like, do you have wood? I'm going to play a Monopoly card on you.
Sure it is. It's not within the rules. Well, it is within the rules.
That's why I always say,
But if you were a character in that game, you wouldn't
I'd pull out my broadsword and cut the guy's head off. Oh, wait, that's not what we're talking about.
yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily be able to ask that question that same way.
So to take a step back, what about when the DM's playing?
Okay, so
And so where's their magic circle there?
the magic circle is am I bringing the outside world? When I think of the magic circle, it's am I bringing the real world into the world of the game? I'm not if I pull the Monopoly card like that. What you're saying is if I were a character in the game, but that's not the kind of game it is. So I think it's still within the magic circle. It's unusual, and it never worked again for him because we were very careful. Why? Who has wood? That depends on what you're asking. What do you want?
So I think in D&D, I think the Dungeon Master can be directly involved when they're playing a non-player character, right? So when they're playing the butcher that you're trying to negotiate prices with.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Or when
yes.
they're playing, the blacksmith.
Yeah.
Or that kind of thing. I think that is one time in which the DM can step in the magic circle.
Yeah.
In your magic circle, Frank, and play negotiation within the
I
game.
agree. That's true. That's definitely true.
But yeah, I think this is kind of a philosophical question about board games, right? Of like what is within the game and what's not within the game.
I think we're gonna have to do an episode at some point in time on what the magic circle is.
Right? Because like I've played with people where I will do something within the game that just completely destroys them, and then they're like mad at me in real life afterwards. And I think that's such a hard dynamic to play of like keeping the game within the game and knowing like, no, this isn't a personal thing. This is a strategic decision within the game. Because then the flip side, there's also people who are like, I don't like you, so no matter what I do in this game, I'm just going to destroy you.
So, yeah, boy, and there you're right on the edge there. Because I've had experiences where I was the weakest player on the board, and there was no strategic necessity to hit me in such a way that I would never recover in the game. And that's hard. That was very hard for me to take, and I didn't deal with it well because there was not. It felt like it wasn't a strategic decision. It was I want to. In this case, it was a scout, and he wanted to beat the ex-scoutmaster. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's what might have been what was going on there. But there was also. I've also been in a situation where strategically it was a smart move to take me out. And I'm generally okay with that. But the question is, what's your motive? Is your motive outside the magic circle or not?
Yeah.
If the motive is, I want to, for instance, there's a guy who wins consistently in our gaming group more often than not. And if we all said we're going to take him down outside the game group and then did it in a game, that's probably a foul to say we're going to take him down because he wins all the time, because that's not within the game. If we said strategically he's holding the center of the board and we need access to the center of the board, we all do, so we're all going to attack him and we're going to take the center of the board from him, that's within the magic circle very definitely.
The other problem is, even if we agreed on that to all gang up on him, we would probably still lose. So
That could be true.
Maybe. Yeah, that could be true.
Well, and that's why I think negotiation is so interesting, because there's two levels, right? There's negotiation in the game, and then kind of that player social contract negotiation that takes place outside of every single game. And that idea of, like, when we come to the table, what are we agreeing our goal is coming to the table? Is it we don't care about each other and we just want to win? Is it we all want to have a good time? And I think that's where the breadth of types of board games is so great, that there are casual games that we can sit down and say, we're just going to have fun.
Yes.
And then there are games where we sit down and say, okay, we want to think, we want to play hard, and we want to have good strategy.
Yeah, and even if it's not win, we want to play well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how I'm perfectly fine with coming away from a game saying I played well. There have been games of Catan where I've lost, and I've lost by 3 or 4 points out of 10. And I still felt like, given how limited I was, I ended up with a bad area of the board for whatever reason. I was very constricted, and I still managed to get 7 points out of this. I feel good.
Yeah.
And that's very different than even though I didn't win, that's very different than how often we walked away from a game and somebody won and we're all like, yeah, we all played awfully, and none of us feel good about it.
Yeah,
even the person who won.
You didn't win, we lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You lost least.
We've all done that.
Yeah, we've definitely had games like that.
I think it's interesting that this, as much as we've talked about this, it's not a mechanic on Board Game Geek, and it's not something that we even play a whole lot in the game. So it seems so important to the gaming experience and to what goes on when you're playing a game, but it's not a recognized mechanic maybe by the organization.
The community.
And there are a few games written in the rules.
So is it still negotiation when we do something? Because we all do this, right? Somebody's getting ahead, and no one will actually negotiate somebody say, all he needs to do this, and he gets 10 points. And no one's actually saying we need to gang up on him and prevent that. But that's really what they're saying.
Yeah, playing Catan, and like, Frank has 8 points. In case y'all didn't know.
Is that negotiation?
I think that's a form of negotiation.
I would agree.
It's an implicit negotiation.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, Shane agrees. I thought maybe he would be the contrarian this time.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest negotiation that we play with games is figuring out which game we're going to play. Because there's so many times on game day where there's a bunch of people around the table and a bunch of games stacked up, and it takes us 10 to 15 minutes to figure out what game we're going to play, who's going to play it.
That's a
good day.
That is a good day. And I feel like a lot of times I end up picking a game and I go, I'm going to play this in the dining room. And then everybody looks around of like, well, who else is going to play? Right? And just this kind of negotiation taking place of who's going to be at what table, with who, playing what game. Yeah, so I love this conversation. I think this conversation is so interesting. I think if this is something that you really like, this idea of bribes and trading and negotiation, I would definitely say pick up Sheriff of Nottingham. I think that's one of the best games that includes this, and it's an easy game to play. It's a simple game, and I have a lot of fun. Now, if you're like, I don't like arguing with people, I don't like negotiating, lying, stay away from that game, because that is literally all that game is. But we hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for inviting others and negotiating with others to listen to us. We hope you have a great day.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com, or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.